Hello students, welcome to BYJU'S. Welcome to a session on a detailed discussion related to one of the very important current affairs topic, that is generalized system of preferences. Very recently the President of USA has announced that he will be withdrawing the status of a GSP that USA had given to India back in the year 1970s. Let's have a detailed discussion related to this particular topic. The points that I'll be discussing in this particular video will be: one, we'll understand the basic concepts or the introduction to the concept of a GSP. Then we'll have a look at how the evolution has happened between India and US GSP. I'm focusing on the GSP between India and US for a simple reason. Right now, please remember this: the GSP status to India has been given by multiple developed economies. There are more than 20 countries which have given the GSP status to India. USA is one of them. After this, we'll have a look at what are the reasons or the causes for this particular decision of the US to withdraw the GSP status given to India. Once we are done with this, what is the likely impact of this? And finally, what is the way forward for Government of India? Let's begin the discussion by understanding the basic concept of a GSP. But before that, whenever trade is conducted between two countries, let's say A and B, if A is exporting certain commodities to country B, the country B, if it imposes customs duties, basically the product of country A, when it lands in country B, will become costlier. Just hypothetical situation, if the cost of the product was 100 rupees and country B imposes 10% customs duty, then this particular product, when it lands in the market of B, will become 110 rupees. So if the duties are imposed, these are called as tariff barriers. These particular tariff barriers will increase the landed cost of these particular products. So basically, under the concept of GSP, a developed country will provide certain benefits to developing country when developing country exports the products into the developed economy. Now, what is this particular benefit I am referring to? The developed country promises not to impose any of the tariffs. And since the developed economy is not imposing this particular tariff, exports from these particular countries into the developed economies are expected to increase. The technical term that is used is developed country will be referred as a donor country and the developing country will be referred as beneficiary country. Now, in this particular discussion, India will become a beneficiary country, US is a developed country or a donor country. So, US government back in the year 1970s basically announced that India will be part of the GSP program, and since India will be part of the GSP program, certain exports which are coming from India will not be imposed with any of the tariffs by the US government. This will basically promote the competitiveness of Indian exports. Now, how do you define the concept of a GSP? GSP, or Generalized System of Preferences, is a program which is implemented by developed economies wherein the tariffs will not be imposed on certain imports coming from developing economies. This is a basic concept or an understanding of the definition of a GSP. Now, the concept of a GSP was discussed under United Nations Conference on Trade and Development. And this particular discussion happened in the first round of this particular organization, second round of this particular organization, which was done in the year 1968 in New Delhi, and concrete measures were implemented to promote the concept of a GSP. Now, in case of USA basically picked up this particular idea of a GSP with the passage of a Trade Act in the year 1974, and with the passage of this particular act, it started giving the GSP status to various economies, including India. Now, initially, when the introduction of a GSP was done, there was basically a time period or a ceiling period of 10 years. That is, the developed economies basically agreed to provide the GSP status to various developing countries only for a period of 10 years. But during the Tokyo round of multilateral negotiations, which were conducted between 1973 to 1979. The ceiling of a 10-year duration was withdrawn. Now we have seen what is the concept of a GSP and how the GSP came into implementation. But I basically stated that the developed economies will give the tariff exemption to certain products which are getting exported from the developing countries. Now on what basis these particular products will be identified? These criteria or guidelines under which these particular products will be identified are called as rules of origin. And the rules of origin are defined by the developed countries or donor countries. Usually the three very important criteria which are considered under the concept of ROO are: 1. Origin criteria, transport condition, and the third one, document evidence. Let's look at the first one, origin criteria. It basically says that whenever the developing country exports the product to developed economy and wants the benefit under GSP, this particular product has to originate or has to be produced in this particular beneficiary country. That is origin criteria. Second, transport condition. What is the mode or what is the kind of a route which has to be used for the developing country to get the benefit of GSP when they export the product to developed economies? That is called as a transport condition. And not only this, once the product lands into the territory of developed economies, what kind of a documentation has to be provided? That is the third criteria. Now, apart from these three criteria, the developed economy may also impose a certain additional criteria, which is its prerogative. So, this is the concept of a rules of origin. And as per this particular rules of origin, the USA has allowed more than 4,000 products under the concept of a GSP. And out of this, India exports around 1,900 products to USA which get the tariff exemption under the ambit of a GSP. Now, what are the advantages? Let's look at the advantages from two perspectives. One, the advantages for the donor country and the advantages for the beneficiary country. Let's start with the latter, that is beneficiary country. Since these particular beneficiary countries are developing countries, there will be promotion of exports because of concept of a GSP. That is, the products which are manufactured in developing countries becomes cost effective when they land into developed economy. That is one benefit which will promote the exports from the developing countries. Second, it will also lead to flow of or inflow of forex reserves. It will promote employment generation. It will promote industrialization, etc. So these are some of the very important benefits that are derived with implementation of a GSP by developing or a beneficiary country. Now, what is the benefit for a donor country? One of the very important benefit will be cheaper imports or cost effective imports. Since these are coming from developing countries, it is expected that when they land into the donor country, and since there is no tariff imposition, these will be cheaper for the domestic manufacturer of a donor country. And not only this, whenever these kind of inputs are cost effective, the output or the final goods which are produced by the manufacturers in the donor country will also be cost effective. And these can be exported even to other countries. So these are some of the benefits that are derived by the beneficiary country as well as the donor country under the ambit of a generalized system of preferences. Now, what has been the relationship between India and US under the ambit of a GSP? As already mentioned, US passed an act, that is the Trade Act of 1974, and with the passage of this particular Trade Act, it started giving the GSP status to various other countries apart from India. Under the ambit of a GSP, USA has imported huge amount of goods in terms of billions of dollars. Now, some of the figures are between 2015 to 2017, the imports are done by USA under the ambit of a GSP increased from $17.5 billion to more than $20.7 billion. And out of this, a substantial part of the imports are done by USA were basically from India. That is, India was the dominant exporter under the ambit of a GSP to USA. In 2015, the value of exports done by India under the GSP was more than $4.5 billion, and in a span of 2 years has increased by more than $1 billion to $5.58 billion. Now, these numbers are very important for a simple reason. Between 2015 to 2017, Indian exports were dwindling. That is, there were certain difficulties with respect to the exports going out of India. And during this particular period of time, the exports from India under the ambit of a GSP to USA have actually increased. That is one point you need to understand. Apart from this, as per the latest numbers which are put forward by US Department of Commerce, it has been found that in the year 2017, out of the total imports done by USA under the ambit of a GSP, more than $5 billion worth of exports were done by India, and India was the major beneficiary country under the ambit of a GSP in the year 2017. Now, out of this particular $5 billion, it is said that the exports are done from 13 sectors, and these are some of the very important sectors. But out of these particular 13 sectors, the most important sectors are: 1. Engineering products, 2nd. Chemical products, 3rd. Textiles, etc. So these are some of the very important sectors from where majority of the exports have gone to USA under the ambit of a GSP. And since these have gone to USA under the ambit of a GSP, there will be no tariffs imposed, and there are certain benefits derived by these particular sectors in the form of a tariff exemption. So these are some of the numbers related to the GSP between India and US. Now, why is USA withdrawing this particular status of a GSP which it had given to India? Some of the very important reasons or causes are: 1. India enjoys a trade surplus in a trade between USA, and conversely I can basically say that USA has got a trade deficit with India. And in the recent times, if you have seen, the policies which are formulated or the negotiations which are conducted by the USA government are basically to bridge this particular trade deficit that they suffer from having trade with various other countries. For example, very recently they are renegotiating a trade deal with China, with which there is a huge trade deficit. Now the same trend they are applying with India also. They want to bridge this particular trade deficit which is more than $20 billion. And very recently, the government of India has already taken certain measures to reduce this particular trade deficit. For example, they decided to import or purchase a certain oil from USA, and they were also renegotiating in terms of giving certain exemptions or market access to exports from USA. And as per government of India, it has seen that the exports from USA have increased by more than 30% in the last fiscal itself. And this is the second consecutive year where the exports from USA have actually increased to India. So yes, there is a trade deficit, but government of India has stated that it was negotiating. It has already taken certain measures to bridge this particular trade deficit. Second reason is basically related to some of the lobby groups. For example, India imposed certain restrictions in terms of certification. That is, certain dairy products which were being exported from USA to India. Government of India basically demanded certification that the fodder or the feed that was provided to the bovine animals here was not involving certain commodities or certain type of products. And the reasoning given by government of India was basically that whenever this kind of a feed involving these particular products are fed, it goes against Indian culture. So to protect the Indian culture, or on the grounds of Indian culture, the importers or the government of India basically demanded that these particular exporters provide certification, which basically was opposed by the lobby group here. They approached the USA government. Second, very recently, the government of India started regulating the prices of medical devices in the market. And one of the products that it started regulating was the stent. And the producers, who are majorly the US manufacturers, approached the USA government and complained against this particular kind of a regulation by government of India. Now, government of India basically stated that we are trying to regulate these kind of products or the prices of these kind of products in the market so as to ensure that the healthcare is provided to the sections of the society at affordable prices. And since India is a developing country, there is a need of regulating these kind of products in the market. But a lobby group, that is AdvaMed, approached USTR, United States Trade Representative, and filed a complaint against this particular regulation by Government of India. Apart from this, very recently, some of the authorities of Government of India have issued guidelines related to the data storage or local data storage, which has to be done by companies such as Visa, Master, etc. This also has become one of the flashpoints between the Government of USA as well as Government of India. Apart from this, another very important flashpoint was the new guidelines which were issued by the government under the e-commerce sector. So these are some of the issues of friction which have led to certain disputes between the Government of India as well as the Government of USA. Earlier in the last year, Government of USA withdrew the GSP status given to around 50 products or 50 exports from India. And now it has decided to withdraw the whole GSP status given to any kind of exports coming from India. That is another reason. Next, very recently the President of USA has called India as a tariff king. He cited the example of Harley Davidson bike. Earlier, Government of India, whenever this particular product which was manufactured outside India entered India, imposed a tariff of 100%. And when this particular issue was raised, Government of India reduced this from 100% to 50%. Now, despite this particular exemption of 50% given, the President of USA keeps on hammering this particular point and says that whenever the two-wheelers which are manufactured in India are exported to USA, they impose a very small amount of a tariff. And when these products or these bikes such as Harley Davidson which are manufactured in USA enter into India, India imposes a huge amount of a tariff that is equivalent to 50%. He says it has to be much lower, or else he will bring in a concept called as a reciprocal tax. What is this particular concept of reciprocal tax? It basically means the same rate of a tax or same amount of a tax will be imposed when India's exports will enter into USA. I'll give an example. Let's assume this is a trade happening between India and USA. Let's say USA exports a two-wheeler bike into India and Indian government imposes a tariff of 50%. USA will impose the same amount of a tariff when India also exports a two-wheeler bike into USA. This is a basic explanation of a concept of a reciprocal tax. But having said so, understand this, various experts have stated that these kind of a reciprocal taxes will not work out in the market for a simple reason. The value of the product may not be the same, volume of the product may not be the same. In this particular situation, how do you expect these kind of reciprocal taxes to work out? But nevertheless, let's have an elaborate discussion related to what is the truth in this particular statement that India is a tariff king. Yes, India imposes a certain very high tariffs on certain imports, but these particular tariffs are imposed with certain objective. The objective is to protect the domestic manufacturers. And please understand this also, India is not the only country in the world which imposes a heavier or a higher tariffs. Every country imposes a very high amount of tariffs on some or one or the other products which are flowing into their particular economy. For example, USA itself imposes a highest tariff of 350%. Japan also imposes a very high amount of a tariff on some of the imports to the extent of 736%. India, the highest tariff that it has imposed, as of now it is around 150%. And Korea also imposes a very high amount of tariffs on some of the imports to the tune of 807%. Now these kind of tariffs are imposed with certain objective. For example, US imposes this amount of a tariff to protect its tobacco manufacturers. Japan imposes this amount of a tariff to protect its rice producers. So basically you can see that every country will impose these kind of a tariff. India is not just an outlier. But more importantly, rather than looking at the highest value of the tariff, what you should look at is the average tariff imposed by these particular countries. And India's average tariff comes at around 13.8% on all the imports, whereas on the goods, it is just over 10.5%. To be more precise, it is 10.7%. Whereas USA imposes an average tariff of 3.4%. China imposes average tariff of 9.8%. South Korea imposes an average tariff of 13.7%. So when you look at the average tariff, India is not a tariff king. But nevertheless, this particular argument is put forward by the US government every now and once. Next, in the recent times, what we have seen is the government of USA has started formulating and implementing the trade policies or any kind of policies which are more inward looking. That is, they are only worried about the manufacturing in USA, they are worried about the employment in USA, so on and so forth. These kind of inward looking policies are counterproductive when you take into context the global supply chain value system. Because right now the situation is a single product or a final product will be added with the value in multiple countries. For example, we can see that many of the products are not manufactured in a single country. We use the products which are manufactured in one country as an intermediary goods in another country, and the product which is manufactured in second country is used as an intermediary good in the third country. So to produce a final good, we will use the imports from multiple countries. This is a basic example of a global supply value chain system. These kind of policies by USA are counterproductive to this kind of a global supply chain value system. So these are some of the reasons why the US government has basically decided to withdraw the GSP status given to India. Now, what is the likely impact of this particular decision of the US? I'll discuss this particular impact under two heads. There is specifically the likely impact on the beneficiary country and the likely impact on the donor country. Let's start with the beneficiary country. Though there will be certain impact, the government of India has put forward an argument that, first of all, the benefits that was derived on these particular exports under the ambit of a GSP was only to the tune of $190 million for the year 2017, and the value of the goods which exported from India got the benefits under the ambit of a GSP were just over $5 billion out of the total $50 billion plus which were exported from India. So basically, argument of the government is one, the value in terms of a tariff exemption is very small, it may not have a huge impact. Second, these particular exports are spread across 13 sectors. And since these are spread across 13 sectors, the withdrawal of a GSP status may not have a huge impact on a single sector. So the impact or the overall impact on India's exports will be marginal. This has been the argument put forward by Government of India. But having said so, various experts have already stated that there will be a certain impact on various sectors in Indian economy. Now, what are these particular impacts? Let's have a look at it. One, the MSME sector, which contributed to majority of these particular exports, will get affected. And since there is already certain issues with the MSME sector in terms of finances, this will put further financial stress on these particular sectors. And more importantly, the MSME sector is one sector which generates huge amount of jobs or employment opportunities. With this kind of an impact, it is expected that there will be certain problems with respect to jobs scenario in India. Second, there will be threat from the competitors. What kind of a competitors? Whenever these particular products were exported to USA, apart from manufacturers from India, there were also manufacturers from Bangladesh, Malaysia, Vietnam who were competing to export the products to USA. Now, since the GSP status will be withdrawn on India's exports, these particular products will become costlier in the USA market. Hence, it will open up a window for these particular exporters from these particular countries to start exporting and occupy the market share in the USA market. This is expected to happen. Third, already the current account deficit, trade deficit for India is on a higher side. With this particular withdrawal of the status, it is expected that the exports will get affected and there might be an expansion of the trade deficit. So these are some of the effects or likely impact that is going to happen on the Indian economy. Now, what about the US economy? It is expected that since these particular products will become costlier in the US market, if the manufacturer goes ahead and purchases the same products, the output of the US manufacturer will become costlier and their exports will also become costlier, which will affect their exports. And second, USA in the recent times has tried to replace China as a dominant supplier of raw materials or the resources to US. Now this particular decision to replace China will be affected because India was one of the viable suppliers to US market. So these are the likely impact or the effects that will happen on the US market. But more importantly, these kind of skirmishes or these kind of frictions which are happening between Indian government as well as US government have to be de-escalated through negotiations or trade deals, whatever the measures that are taken. Because please understand, if de-escalation doesn't happen and escalations happen, it may basically affect the growth prospects of both the economies, that is USA as well as India. So these are some of the points related to impact. Now, what are the steps or measures which can be taken by Indian government? One, it can announce implementation of reciprocal taxes. Already in June last year, the government of India had announced increased import duties on 30 products which were exported by USA. But this was later reduced to 29 and the implementation date or enforcement date was postponed. Now already the enforcement date has been postponed for 6 times. Now the latest date is April 1st, 2019. The government of India can allow the implementation or enforcement of these particular reciprocal taxes, but this will only escalate the issue. Second, it can approach WTO. Because please understand, whenever GSP benefits are provided to a beneficiary country, it has to be without any expectations or without any returns in expectation. Now, USA is basically linking other trade issues with the GSP benefits. That can be one grounds for India dragging USA to WTO. The second ground is usually whenever the GSP benefits are withdrawn, there are certain conditions. For example, USA will withdraw the GSP benefits given to certain imports on 2 conditions. That is, whenever this particular product, let's say EX, which is exported from India to US, crosses a value of $180 million. In this particular situation, the USA can withdraw the GSP benefit to this particular product. And second, this particular product X crosses more than 50% of the total imports of the same product done by USA. I'll repeat the statement. Let's say USA imports same product from multiple countries. And out of the total imports of the same product done, the Indian exports account for more than 50% of imports are done by USA. Even in this particular situation, USA can decide to withdraw the GSP status provided to this particular product. So usually under these 2 conditions, USA withdraws the status of a GSP. Now on what basis the USA government had withdrawn the status of a GSP benefit given to Indian exports can be questioned by Indian government at WTO. Already there is a precedent where in the last decade, Indian government expected or Indian government challenged certain decision making of European Union with respect to GSP benefits. And the WTO ruled in favor of India. The gist of the ruling was simple. WTO stated that whether to provide GSP benefits or not is the discretionary power of the developed economy. But whenever the GSP benefits are provided to multiple countries which are at the same level of development, there cannot be any kind of discrimination. I'm going to understand the statement here. WTO basically stated to provide a GSP benefits or not to provide is a discretion of a developed country. But when it provides a GSP benefits to multiple countries which are on the same level of development, there cannot be any discrimination amongst these particular countries. This has been the ruling of WTO. So based on these particular background points, India can approach a WTO, that is a dispute resolution mechanism, and file a complaint against USA. But having stated so, please understand there have been certain doubts raised about the effectiveness of WTO itself. That is, under WTO, the dispute resolution mechanism, under this there is appellate body, and post December 2019, it is stated that there will be only one judge in the appellate body. And for the appellate body to function, there is a requirement of 3 judges. Because any appeals are done by any of the parties, 3 judges will take up these particular appeals. And since there will be only one judge left after December 2019, the effectiveness of this particular route will also be questioned. Next, Government of India can enter into negotiations with USA. Certain benefits can be given to USA exports also. Market access can be provided, which will basically prompt the USA government to have a relook at this particular decision. Because please understand, as of now, it has been just notified. That is, USA has notified that the withdrawal of status will be done. But this particular notification, or after this particular notification, there will be a time period of 60 days. After which this decision will automatically come into enforcement. So still there is a time period of 60 days wherein or during which both the countries or both the governments can negotiate, arrive at a trade deal. Next, another step which can be taken by Government of India is to provide the support to the exporters. That is, whatever tariffs are imposed by USA, provided as a financial support to the exporters, so that supporters will maintain the same price when they export to USA, or when the exports will land into USA will continue to be price competitive. And finally, a long-term measure that can be taken by Government of India is to enter into trade negotiations with multilateral groupings or other trade partners, which will basically open up new markets for Indian exporters. So these are some of the measures or steps which can be taken by Government of India. So this is the detailed discussion related to the concept of a GSP. Thank you. Have a good day.